I should say, relevant financial relationships to disclose with this specific content, and neither do Susan or Dr. Jackson. So, basic objectives. Demonstrate effective management of a large-scale RSS program. Illustrate how RSS can build interdisciplinary relationships, which is really the focus of why we're doing. Discuss disciplinary process for RSS compliance infractions. First, wanted to just give you a little clip. This was done by one of our project coordinators a few years ago, and gives you sort of a flavor of our program, and some of the numbers are outdated, and you know, it's a little bit older, but I do like it, and it does give you just a little bit of perspective about our program, and certainly why I'm so passionate about CME.
I chose healthcare for one simple reason: I like to take care of people.
You need to stay current.
The knowledge that you have to be able to continue to help people.
The knowledge that you have to be able to continue to help people. The literature shows us that 6 years after we've completed our residency, our knowledge base is out of date.
Our goals are to provide the most current clinical education that's available for our clinicians.
On average, we sponsor approximately 50 traditional type conferences and about 85 regularly scheduled series, which translates to about 25,000 educational interactions.
Today we also have online learning. We have smaller group conferences with hands-on experience and group training. We have audience response systems, which generates discussion.
One of the most important characteristics between a patient and the physician is trust.
They don't want a physician that's 20 years out of date on their knowledge. So CME keeps us right on that cutting edge.
So I think that basically sums up why we show up to work every day and why it matters. This one disclosure, this one LOA, this one thing is so ridiculous, or is making me so crazy, this particular Stark law, or this particular aspect of Stark law, I should say. And I think when we sort of break it down and make it less complicated and think about why CME is important and how it actually translates to patient care, it's a little bit easier to have a focus and say, this is why I care, and this is why it's so important. Presentation disappeared. Is that okay?
I still see it.
You can still see it. Okay, just making sure, because I can't. Anyway, so who we are at Intermountain Healthcare. Just a broad base again, and as I said, this was pulled from our presentation in San Francisco, so certainly you may already know some of this information, but who we are, we're a nonprofit integrated delivery system in Salt Lake City, Utah. We have 23 hospitals providing about 50% of the inpatient care. There are about 1,300 employed physicians, 3,300 independent physicians, on medical staffs under the insurance panel. And there are approximately 33,000 total employees. If you didn't know that does make us the largest employer in the state of Utah other than the state of Utah. So, interesting fun fact you can kick around at the airport in case anyone has a question. So a little bit about our program in case you're unfamiliar or otherwise haven't had the opportunity to listen to me superfluously speak about it. Prior to 2007, we had one ACCME accredited program that was for the Salt Lake Valley, as well as Primary Children's that was handling pediatrics, and then we had 3 state accredited programs. And then in 2006, it was decided that the program should be combined into one from the adult population, and so we were reorganized in January 1st of 2007, and it required a process change from on-site management really to more process management, rather than each individual facility doing what they needed to do, to saying, how can we do this globally, and what does this look like? So, at the same time, the ACCME accredited program here in Salt Lake City that was handling the adult population was going through reaccreditation, which was challenging as we were also building a new program, which demonstrated a need for a change in the process. And the new RSS process was then discussed and approved to go into place January 1 of 2008, with a focus on truly a monitoring system, which is very different. I think if you've done both, you understand the difference, and so we'll talk about that just a little bit. I think the on-site day-to-day management of an RSS process when you're individually handling each piece of paper in one facility is a little bit different than the way we've structured it with this, where we're doing an overall global management monitoring system of spot checking and really having people send things back to us, and that's what we're going to be discussing today. Again, just to put into context of how Intermountain Healthcare works, we run in clinical programs, which some people call service lines, so some of the broad-based behavioral health, cardiovascular, intensive medicine, oncology, pediatrics, primary care, surgical services, women's and newborns. These are kind of I wouldn't call them the silos, but the way that we operate, and then everything else falls within. So it's integrated care in that you have, there we go, directors, medical directors, data managers, outcomes analysts, and everyone funnels through that. And so as part of that, the RSS process is super important because all these people need to collaborate and work together, and the RSS process gives them sort of a structure to make that happen. That these individuals, that the outcomes analysts are looking at data, that then they're filtering through to the medical directors that then give the business directors information to make financial decisions. And so really that whole process is super important, and we feel like the RSS activities really funnel that channel. So it's less about CME credit and more about how we can facilitate the overall patient experience. Of course, there are annual clinical goals, and we won't go into those specifically, other than to say that what we're doing in the RSS program feed into these clinical goals and how the clinical programs fit together. So what is an RSS? Of course, this is kind of the rudimentary question to the ACCME. It's a series of multiple sessions that occur on an ongoing basis, either monthly, weekly, or quarterly, and are primarily planned by or presented to the accredited organization's professional staff. You all know what this looks like. Examples of activities that are planned and presented as a regularly scheduled series are grand rounds, tumor boards, morbidity, mortality, things like that. To those of us who are in the business, it looks like just a little bit of a headache sometimes, but it's an excellent way for us to actually make sure that we're touching back with our customers and with our base. It's really easy to have those one-time hit and miss, conferences that may or may not have a tremendous impact on someone's actual behavior. But it's really, I believe, in the RSS where you're changing practice on a daily basis, because that's these weekly, monthly, quarterly activities where someone can see the growth between point A and point B and say, this is how this changed my practice in tumor boards. So, the importance of an RSS to providers, and I would say, I would argue that these are in order. Their need for regular updates on clinical topics is the first. The second is ease of information access, that they need to be able to show up and know where it is and how to get there, and that's super important. Next, exposure to outside ideas and speakers, that we can't all be in a think tank, that we have tremendous thoughts, and I think we have really phenomenal clinicians within our organization, within Intermountain West, but we like to bring in other people to spice it up a little bit. And then, of course, opportunity for collaborative discussions on clinical topics and case-based presentations, which is certainly the basis of all of our tumor boards. And finally, and I would say the least important, is really the CME credit. It's a nice to have, but it's not the requisite. It's not the reason that anybody's showing up. No one goes to tumor boards in the morning because of CME credit. They're going for reasons 1, 2, and 3, 4. They're really not going for reason 5. The CME credit is simply there because it's a good idea to have, and it adds that stamp of approval that says this is accredited and this matters, and we're doing it in a way that's important, in a way that's not stochastic, but it's not what says this changed my practice. And I think that's where we as CME providers need to change our behavior from thinking CME credit is the end-all be-all, because it's really not. It's really in saying that the content I'm providing matters and not the credit that I'm putting on your transcript, because that's less important. To the healthcare system and ultimately to the patients, which is really who we're providing for and ultimately what matters the most. It allows for broad dissemination of best practices. What better way to translate this information? When we do conferences, you may have 100 people show up over the course of 3 days, and that's fine. When we do CV Grand Rounds, it's broadcast to hundreds of people every Wednesday morning from Intermountain Medical Center, at 7 a.m. And then it's subsequently streamed on our website for years to come, and thousands more people watch it, and that changes practice. That's how best practice, is disseminated out to new people. Access to wide audience of practitioners enable consistency of message, helps ensure standard care at a high level, forum for discussion of safety, quality, and cost effectiveness initiatives. So this is why I think over the past 6 years I've slept less and less and less, and gives you an accurate picture of how we slowly, or in some cases quickly, grew. In 2007, when the program came together, there were about 40 regularly scheduled series that were a part of the program that we were, or that I was facilitating, I should say, and then it grew a little, and then word got out that, hey, we're having this series, and you could join, you could fill out some paperwork, and we could make this work, and suddenly one day I woke up and there were 128 of them, and it was a lot of paperwork, and we needed a little more support than I think we even knew what to do with. But it was really in that initial jump between 40 and 59 where we recognized this is going to grow, and it's going to grow quickly. And as I said, we were in that transition process between the on-site monitoring and really kind of this global process of going from St. George to Logan, and trying to figure out how do we do this differently when it was 4 hospitals and it was just in the Salt Lake Valley, it was a different process than spread across the state, and how do we make this work? And so suddenly we were revamping our RSS process to this monitoring system, and you can see it needed to happen because the change was inevitable and it came quickly, and once it did, we needed it. So it was established in 2008, and it's reviewed annually by our CCMEP committee. It delineates responsibilities of the physician course directors, course coordinators, and the CME office. Very specifically, and we hold them to it, and they hold us to it on a regular basis. It includes continuing education expectations. It defines required documentation for the overall series, as well as each accredited activity, and we fall back on it regularly. Our RSS specialist, Sage Henriksen, is very clear with her expectations. We have very specific checklists, and we'll go through those. It outlines a monitoring process for the program, for our office specifically, as we step through that with them, and our compliance process, as well as how we track all of our finance and our basic evaluation guidelines. And this is all going to be posted. Can you still see what I'm seeing? Okay, just checking to make sure. So this is on our website, and it will be in the notes, and we'll make sure that it goes out in the email as well so that you have full access to it. It's on our physician portal, which is open to anybody, but you're certainly welcome to peruse and use anything you'd like. So we have some frequently asked questions on the left-hand side, as well as things that are posted with coordinator trainings, and then really the portion that we're going to talk about today is over here on the right-hand side, the RSS documentation and paperwork side. So we're going to pull up this process. All right. So it goes through step by step, and I'm not kidding when I say when a new course director calls and says, I want to have an RSS, or I'm having one and you should give me credit for it, and we'll sit down with them, either Sage and I together based on timing and availability. And certainly proximity, and go through step by step. This is what your responsibility is. This is what this actually looks like, and then turn to the course coordinator and go to the next page and say the same thing as the course coordinator. This is your responsibility. This is what you're going to do, and walk through with them very specifically. They then have an acknowledgement page that they sign, and I won't pull that up, it's back on the website, but you can see it, that very specifically says, I've read this, I know what I'm accountable for, and I will do it. and we take that very seriously. I think it's important for people to know that I will be held accountable, and that when I see that there are these objectives in place, and that I have things I have to live up to, that I'm not going to have any qualms with that. I think it's easy to see CME as a burdensome amount of paperwork, or to think, oh, one more roster, one more thing. But I think when people can see the back end of it and see why it's so important and why we're doing what we need to do, it's easier for them to walk through this process. So just to step through some of the specific requirements of our course coordinators, because I think that's kind of the nitty-gritty and really the hands-on of what makes this work. The most important one, truly, I believe, is that they act as on-site representation for our staff at each of their activities. Certainly they have a million other things on their plate. I recognize first and foremost that our RSS coordinators are busy people. They have 12 other responsibilities at best, clamoring for their attention all the time. And their CME portion of their job is probably very small for most of them. Most of them have, very full plates. But we do ask that during that specific time that they're part of the CME team. And that anything that happens, if there's an issue or question, they have full access to any of us that they can call and get a hold of us at a moment's notice to say, there's something going wrong with my activity and I don't know what to do. So we do ask them to act as that representative. Next would be that they have all the proper documentation at the session. We make sure that they're fully trained up front so that they know what that proper documentation looks like. But from that point on, they are accountable for it. And when that doesn't happen, or if for some reason that doesn't happen, that they're aware of that and that we will certainly hold them accountable for that. The next one, they coordinate any promotion of the series with us. That doesn't mean that we necessarily make it for them, but that it has to go through our office in terms of review and approval. As those of you that have been in CME long enough to know, everything is so heavily scrutinized in terms of every word and every italicized bullet and things of that nature. It's difficult to stay on top of all of that, and it's a really quick way to lose your accreditation or at least get in trouble with accreditation. And so we do require that they send everything to us, and there's a timeline for that process. And so we do specifically discuss that with them because it's an easy way to get tripped up, especially at accreditation time when you start pulling out flyers and thinking, oh my gosh, what is going on here? So that is a requirement. The next one is simple or I should say seemingly simple, but notify the Intermountain CME office immediately of any potential issues or questions regarding the activity and or series compliance. I think it's really easy for coordinators who are busy with other things to blow it off and think that's probably not a big deal. And so basically we kind of turn them into our little nervous Nellies and say, anything looks weird, call us. Just call me. Whatever it happens to be. And I'm sure they get tired of hearing that, but it's easier to deal with something on the upfront than it is on the back end. And so we appreciate them being a part of that. The real tricky points are coming. Complete RSS paperwork after each activity and return to Intermountain CME office no later than 5 business days following the activity. 5 business days sounds like a lot, I know, to some people. And we really did receive some pushback on this one when we were presenting this in San Francisco. People were saying 5 business days is a long time. And you would think so, but when you really think about how 5 business days slips past your purview in a week, it happens so quickly. And originally when we started looking at the process, it was 3, it was 7, it was different numbers, and it quickly became obvious that people are busy and it is hard to stay on top of these types of things. And it's one thing if it's a quarterly activity, but for those weekly activities, it just happens so fast. And so we decided on 5 business days and have been very pleased with it. Certainly different things work for different programs, but that's been the recommendation that I have. And then on the upfront, notify the Intermountain CME office of the activity details at least 2 weeks prior to the activity. Again, this is something we debated heavily, as a committee, as a program. Some of our, more passionate members thought it should be earlier, that if you were giving an honorarium or if you were doing something that it should be more than 2 weeks in advance. And other people thought, 2 weeks, how do you necessarily know everything you need to know 2 weeks in advance? Things happen on the fly, in a hallway conversation. 2 weeks is far too long. But those 2 weeks, at 2 weeks out, you need to know all your activity details, including your presenter, your topic, your location, time, and potential locations for broadcasting. Which, for most people, presenter and topic, that could change in 2 weeks, but location, time, and broadcasting locations is pretty set. So that one I'm not too concerned about. So otherwise we're pretty much good to go. And then assisting in completing the following documentation. This goes through the various forms of documentation that need to be filled out, and that's part of the coordinator responsibility as well. Of course, they complete, just to continue scrolling down, they complete a disclosure form annually. They're required to participate in the education that we're putting on, and basically be one of our coordinators and have a good time with us. So it gives you just a brief overview of sort of the coordinator responsibilities. To continue breezing through our RSS process, let me skip down just a little bit. So the next step is our monitoring process. And this one is something we're currently looking at right now in terms of potential changes as we now have reached 128 series, which is still just a little bit daunting to me. But we're looking at trying to decide, is this still, part of what we're doing. But right now we go out and visit all of our regular scheduled series at least twice a year in person. Someone from our staff or our CME committee, which is quite a feat when you imagine 128 activities, 128 series times 2 from Logan to St. George every year. It's a lot of activities. It's one thing when it's Intermountain Medical Center and that's pretty close to my house and I can drop by in the morning, but for some of the other ones it's quite hard. So we're looking at potentially revamping with some regional changes. Outside of that, we also monitor, of course, all of the paperwork that comes in and do the random spot checks of everything that happens to be turned into SAGE. And then when there are issues, there are compliance visits and 30 and 60-day follow-up visits to each of those activities when something is noted. If we go out for a compliance visit and something is askew and there happens to be missing forms or otherwise items noted, then within 30 to 60 days we then follow a subsequent visit or follow up with a subsequent visit, which then adds to the additional number of visits that we're doing in a year. And so we're looking at trying to decide what this looks like in the next step. What does the 2014 era look like now that it's continuing to grow, and what does that hands-on component look like? I think it is important for your CME office to go out and see what's going on in your actual practice and make sure that the people who are running your RSS program are seeing you and that you're seeing them, and that your clinicians that are participating in these activities are actively seeing that your CME office is engaged. But I also think there's a practical point where you can't possibly attend that many grand rounds or eat that many stale bagels. And so we're still trying to figure out exactly what that will look like in the upcoming year. But part of the revamping. The next step is, of course, the compliance process, which is a tough one, and that is something where we do want to spend a little bit of time today, because I think that is a challenge for us. We do allow for 7 infractions in a year, which I'm a major baseball fan. Opening season, go Yankees, starts April 1st, beat the Red Sox. But as a baseball fan, 7 strikes and you're out is tough for me to swallow. However, as a CME director, 7 strikes is more than plenty. I definitely need to stick with that. We have tremendous RSS coordinators, and I feel very, very fortunate for them. So it's not that I intend to sound like I don't think they're phenomenal. However, I also recognize they're very busy individuals who have, like I said, lots of other things on their plate, and this isn't their first priority or the first thing that they're thinking about in the morning. I happen to think about it first thing in the morning when I wake up, but I also know that it's not what everyone else is thinking about when they first wake up. And so it's easy for these kinds of things to slip up. So as far as our infraction process, I just walk through it real quickly. The first step is, of course, for the assistant coordinator or RSS specialist to contact the course coordinator and follow up. It's a simple, friendly, there's a problem and we need to talk about it. The next step is when I tend to get involved, and that's when it starts to get a little less comfortable. The next step is when our assistant vice president, who's also one of our CME committee co-chairs, Susan Dubois, then Susan starts to get involved, and it escalates from there until it gets greater and greater, and finally at 7 infractions, when 7 times in a year we've had to have discussions, we'll finally sit down with the committee and say, okay, we're there. And it sounds fairly generous and probably a little lenient, but it's really less about the credit than it is about that process. We do bring all of our compliance issues to our CME committee because I think it's important for them to know what's going on and to be aware of who's who in the zoo and what we're what we're all about. Fortunately, it doesn't get that far. We've never gotten to a point where we've actually removed credit from anybody. Because as I said, it's really not about the credit. That's not why people are coming to Grand Rounds, and so penalizing them or having some punitive measure for credit that doesn't really matter at the end of the day is not really what it's about. And, withholding credit from Dr. Smith because, so-and-so can't turn her paperwork in on time is really not that appropriate in my mind. It's more about teaching this person what the appropriate process is and why the ACCME feels the way they do about it. Just to flip back over. Whoops. There we go. So the important part from an ACCME perspective, to be quite honest, because we did just go through reaccreditation back in 2012, is really about that review process with your CME committee. Perfection is not required. The ACCME was very clear, which is good because we're certainly not perfect. But perfection is not required, and it's documentation and improvement that is. That's what's expected. We clearly had places where there were flaws and mistakes, and it was more in the process of writing it down and saying, this is where we messed up, and here's how we're going to do it better, and here's where we told people, you messed up and we're going to do it better. Because that's what they're looking for. This continual quality improvement process is really what the ACCME is all about, and I think that's the beauty of CME is that there are going to be mistakes and they're very aware of it, but they're also generous in saying, fix it and let's talk about it, and I think that's one of the things I truly appreciated. Track it for your self-study. I have a list that is not my finest list, but it's a Word document that's saved on my computer that I don't love, but it's a list of places where we messed up, and we know it, and in my self-study I disclosed it, and I'm sure Janelle has a similar list for her program that I wrote right into my self-study. Here are the areas where we haven't done a great job, and here's where we've fixed them, or here's where I intend to fix them in the next period. And we did have that discussion when the ACCME came for review back in October of 2011, I believe. We did have that discussion about here are the things that we see as potential improvements, and it was a great discussion. It actually led to some really interesting conversation about ways that we could improve and things we could do better, and I think they were just as happy with the mistakes that we've made as the things we've done well, because they could see that we'd identified them. I think it would be far worse to walk in and say, I have no mistakes. I have none at all. I've nailed everything, versus being able to humbly come in and say, yeah, we know we made some mistakes here, and this paperwork was missing, or these things were here, and we're going to fix them, and here's how we're going to do it better, versus thinking that you so boldly didn't possibly miss a disclosure somewhere, which you surely did at some point. And then, of course, the second step of the infraction process is reviewing them with your other RSS coordinators. Make it a shared learning experience, not so that other people feel, diminished, but certainly bringing them up. We do regular trainings, and we'll discuss and say, and this happened, and this happened, and not in a damaging way to say, and then so-and-so messed up, and so-and-so messed up, but discussing that, these are areas where we're slipping, or these are common areas where mistakes are made, so that everyone feels that shared sense of, oh yeah, I've done that too. And they may not have disclosed it to you yet, or they may not feel comfortable bringing it up in that group setting, but there's that shared commonality of, yeah, I probably hadn't realized that was a mistake. And we appreciate being able to share it with our RSS coordinators and hopefully, kind of bring them back into the fold for the few that potentially, aren't right on top of it. So the next step is coordinator education, initial versus ongoing. So for new series, the first step, like I mentioned earlier, that there's a phone or online conference with each new coordinator. That Sage and or myself will have a conversation with each of them about, like we talked about, the process and walking it through step by step, what this looks like, what in practical terms you actually physically have to do. I think it's easy with CME to get wrapped up in jargon and educational objectives and things that are a little harder for people to conceptualize if you're not in the day-to-day workings. And so we step through process-oriented conversations with them about what it actually looks like, and then review the RSS process with the physician course director and have them sign the attestation that I discussed earlier about exactly what they're going to be doing and what that looks like. And then there's ongoing education. There's online trainings similar to this one. Certainly this one isn't required for our purposes, but we do have some that they do have to, that our RSS coordinators are required to participate in. Online videos and attestations of participation, newsletters, article reviews. If there's something interesting that's changed, when the Sunshine Act just changed back in January, of course, or January, just send it out to our RSS coordinators to say, I realize this isn't a part of your purview, it probably didn't hit your screen, but this is huge for us and here's why. And just let them know. I think it's good for people who aren't necessarily always in the business to know what's going on in your business so that they have a small sprinkling of what's around. I'm going to show you. So this is an example of one of our online videos, and we won't watch much of it, I promise. But want to just highlight what Heidi's done for our online regular scheduled series training.
My name is SarahAnn Whitbeck.
Hi.
I'm the director of
Anyway, but gives you an example of some of the trainings that we'll do, and then have our RSS coordinators watch them and then sign an attestation that they've watched it, they're accountable for the content, and potentially take a quiz about it or sign something that says I agree to make sure this happens. And this particular one was about Stark Law. But it helps us ensure that then when we do go back to the ACCME, we can say we've trained on this and here's how we did it, and we've tracked it. Finally, I would just say this is Paul Farmer's. I'm a huge Paul Farmer fan, I should say, and this kind of summarizes why I do what I do and why I think my job is great. Medical education does not exist to provide students with a way of making a living, but to ensure the health of the community. I think if that's your mantra about CME and that's how you feel every day when you think about approaching your job, that it's about changing people and about changing practice and about improving the lives of those around you, CME becomes much less about paperwork and much less about, how am I going to accomplish this simple menial task, and instead about how am I going to elevate, the population health of what's going on here, and how can we make this better? The health of our community is truly what's at stake and truly matters. And if in some small way people attending grand rounds and making a change in their practice will make a difference, then I think we've all done, a better thing for our community. And so this is what motivates me and makes me excited to be a part of CME and drives me to hopefully continue to increase the number larger than 128 regularly scheduled series if that's even possible.
I had a question about that.
Yes.
What do you attribute your jump from when you went from 78 to like 100? What do you think made that difference?
I think part of it was just people having an awareness. Mm-hmm. I think there were a lot of people that were having regularly scheduled series mm-hmm. that just didn't know where to go, mm-hmm. Or potentially were doing things and thought, well, that probably doesn't count. But then once they really sat down and thought about it, it did. Mm-hmm. The other part of that was that previously McCady Hospital was a part of the Utah Medical Association, and they decided to join in. So that big bump, they contributed, I think, about 10 or 15 series with theirs.
Gotcha.
So, any questions from our online audience?
We're at a delay, so.
Okay. Sounds good.
Question. And I don't have any questions in my inbox yet.
I have another one.
Okay.
Go.
Oh, can I go? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
I just had a question about, on your infractions, so you have the 7 infractions. How far deep have you gotten? Like, I know you said you haven't withdrawn credit.
Right.
So have you managed to implement
Yes.
corrective action at like the 4th stage?
4.
4.
4 is my most.
Okay.
Yes. I feel very proud at 4. And really that only happened one time. Other than that, we never get past 2 or 3.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Gotcha. Have you found that most of the infractions are there's a commonality to them? Or
Most of the infractions are really just paperwork issues where it's, oh yeah, I should have done that. It's really just a common oversight. It's nothing that anyone wants to be, oh, I want to be the thorn in Sarah's side. That's certainly not the intent ever. I think moreover it's just oh yeah, I didn't do that. and we totally recognize that. And so I think it's just coming up with processes for people. It's more about trying to help them troubleshoot and say, well, if you just immediately sent this, or if you just immediately did this, kind of discussing process with them versus trying to bicker about, well, why didn't you do it? Because I think that's negligible. We can argue that all day long. But if we can come up with simple processes to make it faster.
With your 5 business day policy?
We do. For the most part, we do. Yeah, we'll occasionally have people fall outside of that, but for the most part, it works out pretty well, because I think most of them want their credit to be exactly. People are checking their transcripts and they want to see what's on there, and so that's one way for us to ensure that they're on top of it. Plus, I think they want it off their plate. I know how I feel about it when I need to settle something up, and I just want it to be done. It's settling your expenses. You're like, if I just send this in, it's just off my desk. And I think that's how they feel about it too. And so I think if we give them 5 days and get it done, then it's less email for them and it's less nagging for us. And so I think it works out. So, any other questions?
No more questions?
Any
Sounds good.
Any other takeaways from the national conference? Did people have any questions that you found interesting or intriguing?
I was really surprised by how many people didn't understand just the overall process, that had a lot of questions about how to report RSS. And so we did discuss PARS just a little bit. I guess we could talk about that, since tomorrow is actually the big day for PARS to be due. Annual report to do tomorrow. If you haven't, I guess this is timestamped, so I probably shouldn't say that, but today is March 28th, 2013. Oh goodness. Wow, that's the whole year. Anyway, annual reports are due tomorrow, and I was really surprised by the number of people that didn't understand how to report that process. So if you're confused about PARS, log on to ACCME.org today, because it's due tomorrow, and figure out how to do that. Every series is accounted for people that may not know. Every series is counted as 1 on your overall, even though it's a series of maybe 52 activities, it's counted as 1 on your total for PARS, for your annual report. And I was really kind of surprised by that. I was also surprised by the number of people that just had random questions about, so you get a disclosure every time, and questions that seemed really, yes, everybody discloses every time. There were some that were, some pretty basic requirement questions that did kind of surprise me. And yet then other higher level questions that were really intriguing and really dynamic. And so we kind of ran the gamut with some interesting thoughts, and yet then other people that have followed up with subsequent questions about checklists and things like that. So I would say follow up with our website. You're welcome to take anything you want from it. We have everything in Word format as well. Anything that anybody wants. We're not proprietary. There's nothing that I have done that hasn't been done by 19 other people, I'm sure. So anything you want, you take it. I couldn't possibly care less. So call me, we'll send it, and you can have it. Or pilfer it off the website, because I certainly didn't invent the wheel, and there's no reason for anybody to reinvent the wheel. So take whatever you'd like.
Questions from the audience.
Okay.
First, where do the slip-ups in RSS compliance usually occur in your experience?
I would say the most common slip-ups come from documentation. Just getting documentation back and forth. It's, I think what happens is in the actual facility, people have a discussion about, we're going to have this activity, and it generates, and it's exciting, and then just getting the information to the CME program can be difficult. That's a challenge for people to get there, which is why we set up the 2-week policy, so that we've got that 2-week buffer to say between the time that you actually need to get it to us and the time this activity happens is 2 weeks, and that's a challenge for a lot of people. So there are times where it's 2 days before, and suddenly we're finding out, well, so-and-so's coming. Okay, let's make that work, and that is definitely frustrating for us. But I would say that's one of our main challenges. We do try to, again, buffer that by requiring that they turn in their promotional materials early, Additionally, we have now, as we were just discussing that, training with the letter of agreement and the Stark law, and all the different compliance fashions that we have that are associated with that. That has significantly helped that process, because of course now that everyone has to have these executed agreements in advance with Stark law, that has helped sort of spur that along faster, because of course if they want any sort of travel or reimbursement or honorarium money, anything of that nature, that they need to give us plenty of time to execute those contracts. So that has helped. I would say, and then of course on the back end, as we discussed, that the 5 business days returning things, we do have just some chronic issues with that. There are people that will always turn it in 6 days late or 19 days late, whatever they happen to come up with. And that's hard. I think those are the individuals, though, that we continue to have conversations with, and then unfortunately continue to have the subsequent conversation of, well, then your transcripts won't be up to date until X number of days, because if we need this many days and you need this many days, then it's going to take this many days. And I think those are the real challenging things. But in terms of actual content issues, it's very rare that we have issues with that. And I feel very fortunate for that, because I think it would be extremely hard to monitor that process. We do require that our physician course directors are the clinical coordinators, or excuse me, the clinical content, experts for what's going on. So they're monitoring the overall content that's being presented.
That kind of leads to the next question: is what role does leadership by the RSS course director play in maintaining compliance?
So they are, of course, if it's, for example, a tumor conference, I don't necessarily know the discussion that's going to happen or that's going to take place in advance, because it's going to be off the cuff. There's going to be, stochastic comments by people. It's going to just happen. And so that person signs a disclosure up front saying, I'm in charge of this, basically, and I'm going to make sure that this doesn't go off the wagon. But they're really kind of accountable, and that's part of what they sign in the attestation, that they're accountable for that content up front and make sure that they're bringing it back to center. And so, because again, there isn't a didactic presentation that's outlined, they have to be the one that says, I'm going to, lead this ship here, and they're aware of that. They're made aware of that up front and take that commitment seriously. So if, for some reason, the physician course director is not going to be on site, they have to designate someone else for that activity to be in charge for that activity of the clinical content. So that's really their main role. If you're the physician course lead, you have to take that on. And it's something that we take very seriously. We expect them to be at every activity. If you're the one, you're there, or you designate someone. So.
And then just a quick mention that Jackie would like to say that providers accredited by the UMA are not using ours.
Oh, good. Well, then.
So don't scare them.
Good. And providers accredited by the UMA, you're going to get more sleep than I am tonight. Yay! Lucky you.
And then we're going to post your PowerPoint on the
Excellent.
website for the UACME.
Yep, you're welcome to post my PowerPoint, and
your
welcome
contact
to.
Information is there in case people have questions.
You are welcome to contact me if you have any questions about how we run our RSS program. Welcome to take anything from our site. We are happy to share. Our RSS application happens, I should have mentioned that, I apologize. So people apply for a regularly scheduled series once every 3 years, and then in the subsequent years they just simply touch bases with us. We check in to make sure that things are still good. They haven't changed any of their overall objectives or kind of plans significantly. So our application is available to anyone that wants to fill it out or use it as part of their planning form. So you're welcome to use that as well. Anything else?
Great.
Okay. Thanks for tuning in.
Okay, thanks. Okay.